Hey, there you are.
Hi, sorry for being a couple minutes late.
No problem. No problem. Thanks for agreeing to do this.
That's okay. Hello.
Yeah. Let me just, if I can, make a few announcements before we get started. So welcome everyone to PR Tech Wednesdays, the weekly webinar where thought leaders discuss the latest in PR tech. If it's Wednesdays, it's PR Tech Wednesdays. I'm your host, Eric Schwartzman. We do this every Wednesday from 12 to 1 Pacific time. It's free, and you can sign up at prtechwednesdays.com. Our guest today is Alexandra Willis. She's the head of communications, content, and digital at the All England Lawn Tennis Club, which hosts the championships at Wimbledon, the most prestigious tennis tournament in the world. Alexandra, welcome to PR Tech Wednesdays.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode of PR Tech Wednesdays is brought to you by the 2020 Media Monitoring Buyer's Guide, the most comprehensive, up-to-date analysis of media monitoring today. This is a vendor-neutral guide with all sorts of useful information about how to choose the right social and traditional media monitoring platform. You can download it at ericschwartzman.com/monitoring. Our bookstagram of the week is ta-da! Sales engagement. And this is how the world's fastest growing companies are modernizing sales through humanization at scale. It's by Manny Medina, Max Altschuler, and Mark Casaglo, who all run a company called Outreach, which is an online sales platform that allows you to sequence your sales and marketing approach for complex B2B sales. Outreach has reached unicorn status and become an important arrow in the quiver of some of the fastest growing companies. We're coming out of this decade of massive corporate growth, and it's no accident that the companies that achieve today's double, triple, and quadruple growth digits year over year have pulled it off. They've all utilized integrated tools for demand generation, lead nurturing, selling, onboarding, and customer success. And those are data-driven processes that have become tried and true. I'll actually be interviewing Max, one of the authors of this book, later today for my B2B Lead Gen podcast, and you could find out more information about that on my homepage at ericschwartzman.com. If you're in public relations, if you're building awareness, visibility, credibility, understanding how that awareness translates into sales is beneficial to any organization. So if you're looking for a sort of a good introductory book on sales engagement and modern sales enablement, this is a great start. I highly recommend it. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and to all our viewers from around the world. The chat room is open for questions, so feel free to ask away. But first things first, let's talk about this year's championships at Wimbledon. Alexandra, tell us how you're managing the communications process given the uncertainty and the circumstances looming over the tournament.
I think the first thing to say is that we're all navigating a completely different world and set of circumstances that certainly no one could have anticipated how much this crisis would affect all of us. And I think we haven't really even seen most of it yet. So a lot of our thinking and planning is trying to think about the context of what most people out there are going through, and to be, hopefully healthy and encouraging everyone to be staying safe and practicing good hygiene practices. That applies to, all of our staff, all of our members, our teams, but also all the people that we work with, and all the people that we rely on, the players as well. And we're doing everything we can to try and make the right decisions. And there's still some way to go in what those decisions will be, but it's obviously a fast moving situation for everyone.
So I've got to think, you're sort of preparing for if the tournament goes on, and then also preparing for if the tournament gets canceled. I know you guys have been publishing updates that you're sort of, you haven't decided yet of whether or not to go on with things. I think there was an announcement by your prime minister that was referenced on the website. So I mean, how cut and dry is your process if decide to cancel? Do you know exactly what you'll do if you decide to cancel? Is there like an order of events that you have to execute?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many organizations who are presented with crises, you have a plan which sort of suggests a sequence of things that you would do in the event of a crisis, and who your key stakeholders are. And the reality is that you never end up having to use it for the thing that you formulated it for. Something completely unexpected will come along, and that's what it ends up being useful for. One of my sort of memorable moments was we had a fire at the All England Club a few years ago outside of tournament time. And so we ended up using the crisis plan for the tournament for outside of tournament time, which was, not quite right, but you go with it and you run with it. And so I think a lot of the thinking for all sports events now is, how do we continue to engage and entertain our fan bases? Is there still an appetite for content, for sports content, given that there isn't much sport taking place? And how can that be more interesting than just reruns and restreams, but taking on board what the mood of the nation is, or the mood of the different countries that we all work in. We don't want to be pumping things out when there's no appetite for them. So those are all the types of things that are in the mix.
How many people does it take to handle communications for the championships? What's the size of your staff?
So we, and I think this is just sort of testament to the sort of change in the world around us, but also the change in what you can do as a sports property today. When you think about communications, we sort of think traditionally about PR, we think about media operations, but we also think about marketing, and we think about engaging with a fan base and audience development and audience insight. And we also think about content creation, and how we provide opportunities for all of those different stakeholder groups to have a relationship with us, be engaged and be entertained. So it's quite fluid, the relationship between all of those different things in the way that we're set up. So if you were to add together all of those different aspects to the championships, you're looking at about 60, 70 people during the tournament. For the rest of the year, when we're a much smaller team, we're about 10 people.
Well, this is like critical time, because the tournament is coming up in fairly short order. So I would imagine, if you weren't, at home, you'd be with your colleagues, I guess, at the All England Club preparing, yes?
Yes, I mean, we've been used to working in an office face to face. We like a meeting. And we're obviously in the position now where we're having to conduct a lot of those meetings virtually in a scenario very similar to this. And the interesting thing about that has been, I wouldn't say that the quality of the discussion and debate has changed, even though we're not physically in the same space. I think we are privileged to have good relationships with the people that we work with. And obviously, when you know someone better, it's easier to engage with them over the phone or on a video conference. But it's certainly a new dynamic and a new aspect. And the most challenging part for most events would be the sort of physical infrastructure pieces, which obviously you can't do from a remote base.
I mean, when you think about, a legacy organization, you guys would almost fit the definition to a T. So, I've got to think you're interfacing with folks who aren't necessarily digital natives, who aren't necessarily, comfortable teleconferencing. And now you've got to sort of manage things remotely. How are you managing that?
I think everyone's sort of, accepted that it's a combination of things that we all need to be trying. That we don't want to just be sitting in our own spaces, living life through email. That face-to-face conversation, even through a screen, is valuable and has an impact on people. So do phone calls. Some people have commented that we've started picking up the phone a lot more than we did even when we were in the same building as people, because it was too easy just to sit at a desk and send an email. So I actually think that there will be positives for many organizations in being more flexible in the way that we can work.
So prior to the pandemic and all this uncertainty, what went into the preparations for the championships? How far out are you credentialing media?
So I think the summary point is, or the overall point is, that we start planning for the next championships pretty much on the day that the previous one concludes. Our committee state holds a meeting on that final Sunday to begin to talk about the next year's event. So it really is, we had a marketing campaign a couple of years ago which described Wimbledon as being a year in the making, and that is absolutely true. I think the other interesting thing that sometimes we forget is that we're not just planning for the championships, we're also managing a brand on a day in, day out basis. We also have a small year-round business. We have a museum which has tours. We have a shop. We have a members club, and members come and play at the club all year round. And we also have a charitable foundation. So those things keep us sort of busy in and of itself. And then you add on the planning for the event itself. In terms of credentialing and really the operational build up to the championships, that normally starts in about January. That's when our ball boys and girls start their training. That's when we open up the applications for media. And then as we move into April and May, that's really when the campaigns begin and the operational builds start.
So, I mean, if things were normal, the ball boys and ball girls would be getting ready now, yeah?
Yes, and they did. They started in January. They all come from local schools. So we've just paused that training now while the schools aren't in session for the moment. But it is, I think, surprising to people how long that these things take to deliver. And it's all sort of spurred on by this desire to make everything better. We have a sort of positioning which is in pursuit of greatness, the idea that we can always be a little bit better. And that one of the things that unites us is that common desire to make everything just a little bit better.
One of the challenges of accommodating media at a large event, obviously, is, space, the amount of space there is. And so, you can't accommodate everyone, even though you might want to. How do you decide who gets accommodated and who does not?
So we're very lucky that we have a permanent infrastructure on site for our media, and by and large we've been able to scale that to accommodate demand. I think the challenges are always going to be navigating and understanding the change in media outlets. So you could take a policy of sticking only to the traditional ones. Once upon a time, there was a policy that you could only be accredited to the championships if your media outlet was a physical newspaper outlet. Obviously, the world has completely changed now, and we have media entities who are online only, and that doesn't mean that they should be penalised for that. Sometimes we think about the countries that we're trying to reach and grow the presence of Wimbledon in, and encouraging media from those countries to come to Wimbledon. We have an expression which is, to know it is to love it. If you haven't been, how can you understand why it's special and why it's different, and therefore wanting to make sure that those people who want to come can. And obviously we have a strong focus and a valuable focus on our event from the British national press. And so we need to make sure that we're able to accommodate them. But that tends to fluctuate depending on what else is going on. So every other year when we come up against a major football tournament, whether that be the Euros or the Football World Cup, we usually see a shift in demand then as well.
How many reporters, journalists, and broadcasters are you accommodating typically at the championships?
So across non-rights holders, so journalists and photographers, we're at about 650 to 700. And then when you add on the broadcasters and all of their technical support teams, or their riggers, or their production teams, it takes you up to around 2,500.
A lot of people, huh? I mean, and they have to eat too, and they have to use the restroom too, and And it's not a huge club, right? I mean, it's not like the U.S. Open club or Grand Slam Indian Wells club, where they're larger clubs with more capacity. What is the capacity of the club?
So the size of the grounds is 40 acres, which you're right puts us smaller than the US Open at Flushing Meadows and smaller than Indian Wells. We have actually acquired some land across the road from the All England Club. It's currently being used as a golf course, and we are beginning to develop plans to make use of that land. It's protected land though, so it could probably only be used for courts and enhancements to the sort of public community experience. But it's, I think demand for space is never something that is solvable. It's about how you're efficient and take on board what you use. I think the other point about media coverage is that, again, this current crisis is showing us that it can be done from anywhere. We want to encourage people to come to Wimbledon. We believe that they have a better experience covering the tournament if they can. But if they end up being in the scenario that they can't, then we should be able to support them and facilitate their coverage of the event as well.
Excuse me, you don't mind if I have some berries while we have this interview, do you?
Strawberries, excellent. Very good.
I just wanted to find out about different levels of credentials. Are there different levels of access depending on the media? And what are those levels? How does it break down?
So the most sort of prized access for a member of the media is a seat on centre court. That's our main court, and it's where the marquee matches of the event are staged. And we have fought very hard to keep the media seats in a good location and with a good level of coverage. The challenge is that the media are obviously dipping in and out all of the time and not often sitting in those seats for a long period of time. So it's always been weighing up the numbers of media that would practically be able to keep the seats filled. So the highest level of access for a member of the media would be one of those centre court seats. We then reduce the number of days that you can have a centre court seat for. So the centre court seat for the full duration of the tournament. There's a centre court seat up to the semi-finals.
And what's an example of a media outlet or a reporter? Who's the New York Times guy who always writes about Kristopher Wilkins or something? Is that his name?
Kristopher Wilkins.
Yeah, there's a guy for New York Times who always writes about tennis.
Christopher Clary.
Yeah, so does he get center court?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends on how regularly somebody covers the championships. It depends on the publication that they write for. There is also a collection of media called the International Tennis Writers Association, who support tennis writers at events all around the world, and we try to support them as well. So it's something that varies. There's not necessarily an exact science to it, and we try and make sure that we're fair and that when there is space in those seats, we offer it up to others.
And what are the other levels after that?
And then the last one is what we call a rover. So somebody who has access to those seats, but would just need to make a request to access them. So it's not a designated seat.
What about online influencers and bloggers? Do you accommodate any of them?
So I think, like many events, we recognise the importance of different people telling your story. I don't really want to call it new media because it's not really new media, but different voices in the mix. And we have worked in partnership with many people writing for all sorts of different outlets, whether that is exclusively social media platforms or other websites. I think where it's worked really well is if that person has a particular affinity with Wimbledon or an aspect of Wimbledon. Maybe they're particularly into the food or the strawberries. Maybe it's the fashion that they particularly have an interest in. Maybe they love old comic books and they want to bring Wimbledon into the comic book market. But it's got to be something that makes sense. What I think we've tried to avoid is just bringing in famous people or people with large followings just for the sake of it, because it won't then ring true with their audiences, and that's very important to us.
I have a question from one of our listeners. Gail asks, "Is this discussion considered on the record?" I would say it would be on the record. How do you feel about that?
It depends what you want to do with it. I would say yes. We're obviously speaking here in a forum, but obviously treat the information respectfully. And if there's anything else I can clarify on that, then I'm happy to do so.
Gail, if you want to ask a follow-up, please do. Christy, let us know if you're able to hear the video now. Sometimes you'll see a player have an on-court meltdown, or you'll see an underdog defeat a top-seeded player, and then you'll sort of see at the end someone from the media team saunter up to the player who just had the meltdown, and they're going to have to try to convince them to do press afterwards, to go to the press room. So talk to me about that challenge. How do you handle that?
So the way that it works in tennis, I mean, we obviously stage the event, but we're supported by, and we work closely with the two tours. And the tours have the wonderful task of putting the media requests to the players. And they do it brilliantly, and they do it day in, day out. And we try and ensure that we are supporting them in making sure that those media requests are reasonable.
Can you tell us any interesting stories of going trying to convince a fallen top player to do press after they've had a meltdown?
So as I say, I haven't had the privilege of having to do that. Some of my colleagues have, though, and I think one of the things that makes tennis an unusual sport is that you are playing out there on the court on your own. And it is a requirement in the rule book, certainly for the Grand Slams, that players are required to do press if requested, whether or not they win or lose. And that's almost unprecedented in the rest of sport, to be under that kind of spotlight, regardless of whether you've had a good or a bad day. And I think that tennis players probably don't get enough respect for that, and they handle it incredibly well. It also brings benefit to them, of course, because they're able to build up personal profiles and build up their characters through the media that they do at the same time.
Talk to us a little bit about the policy that you have with credentialed reporters. What are they allowed to cover? What aren't they allowed to cover? Is there embargoed information that they're given that they have to release at a certain time? How does it work?
So reporters on site, I mean, essentially, they are there to cover the events of the tournament, occasionally things will happen that we will release under embargo, but most of the time we are trying to facilitate opportunities. We have a daily media opportunity where we ask a member of our team to talk about various different aspects of the championships, whether that be the ground staff and how they maintain the courts, whether that be our construction team and the engineering behind the centre court and number one court roofs, whether that be people from our foundation on our charitable giving efforts. So we're very much trying to facilitate the conversation. It's not sort of one that we try to police too much. I think where it gets more challenging is in the fluidity of the media mix, and obviously we have broadcasters who have licensed the rights to the tournament, and so making sure that we protect those rights and that those who haven't licensed the rights are not encroaching on them. And that's really just around the use of video and the ability to capture video content.
What if media disagree with the officials or disagree with how a decision is made by the tournament director? How does that work? Are they allowed to be forthcoming with that? Are they asked to, to keep that, under wraps? Could someone get the boot for disagreeing or publishing or publicly sharing information that is in disagreement with the officials?
I mean, the one thing that is sort of closely restricted and monitored, which would lead to penalties for accreditation, is betting. We're obviously in the UK in a slightly different place from the US. Obviously, understand that betting is just beginning to be legalized, and that many view it as a great opportunity to engage fans in sport and different things going on. Whereas for us, there's a very strict, sort of strict line between reporting on an event and not providing support for betting for integrity reasons and integrity measures. In terms of commenting on tournament officials or what players have done, I mean, the media are entitled to have their opinions, and ultimately, we will support those people who need our support when they need it.
Have you ever had to take someone's credential away?
Happily, no.
Yeah. Have you ever, any of your colleagues or any experiences where someone's credentials were removed and they were booted for something? And what was that?
No, I think generally everyone, it sounds very English to say plays nice, but I think people recognise that we all work in a privileged industry, particularly in the current climate, and that the rules that are there to be respected. But ultimately, we're all trying to do our jobs, whatever sort of bit of the job it might be.
Let's talk for a moment about sponsorship. Obviously the bigger players have their deals in place with the major sports brands, but every now and then you'll see an underdog make it deep into the tournament draw, and they'll wind up with these little patches on their chest and on their sleeve for these sort of niche French cosmetic companies like Guinot and Maricourt. How does that work? Is there like someone at the tournament in the player room saying, hey, wear this, I'll give you, X amount of dollars? Like, what's the process behind how an unknown player who makes it deep in the draw winds up with these sponsorship patches on their outfit?
So I can't really comment on how the players end up making those various deals, but from our perspective, the Grand Slam rulebook, which governs all 4 of the Grand Slams, that rulebook has certain stipulations and regulations around what patches a player can wear on their clothing, and so any player competing in the tournament does actually submit their clothing for review. And so if any player did do a deal with a newspaper or with some other kind of brand because they've made it to a particular round, then that just needs to go through that same approvals process.
And what kind of money do they get for those patches? I mean, any idea at all? Have you heard anything?
No, I mean, I'm sure there's many articles being written about it, but not that I know about, I'm afraid.
And then the other thing sometimes is they'll show either the partner of the player or the player's coach or the player's parents, and they always have a hat on with a brand on it. I mean, I've got to think that's also a paid sponsorship deal.
It could be. The Grand Slam rulebook doesn't stretch to players support boxes and players support teams. Essentially, they are like members of the public, really. We obviously have some understanding and we'll be on the lookout for things that are considered to be campaigning or things that are not appropriate to be on show in that kind of way. But by and large, again, people are respectful. They know where the line is.
So, one of our listeners, Anne, says one of the happiest days of her life was when she got word in February that she won the lottery for center court on July 1st. So her question is, when will the decision be made on whether to cancel or not?
So firstly, Anne, I'm delighted that you were lucky in the ballot. That's brilliant. A great day to go as well. So we don't have a firm timing yet, but I'd urge you to go to our website and have a look at the ticket FAQs, which gives you guidance on what to do. And you can write to us through the contact form as well.
So talk to us about, you've been doing this for how long now?
My role has changed a little bit over time, but I've been working for Wimbledon for about 10 years.
So talk to us over that period of how your job has changed as a result of technology.
Well, I think the main point is the one I made earlier, that we have so much more ability to communicate with people on a direct person-to-person level than sports properties did, even 10 years ago. And so the nature of communications, the nature of marketing, the nature of content creation, is there's so much more at your disposal than there used to be. And so I think the easiest way to say it is that there's just a lot more opportunity, and with that opportunity comes challenges on time, but also great abilities to have more regular contact with our fan base, and hopefully deepen their appreciation for our brand.
But specifically, I mean, over the last 10 years, I have to think there are different tools that you use now to get your job done than you did when you just started. Is that, would you say that's correct or no?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of the things that I sort of spend my days half on WhatsApp, half on Slack, half on Microsoft Teams, half on Google Hangout, half on something else, FaceTime. None of those things, FaceTime might have done, but I'm pretty sure none of the others were in existence 10 years ago. So the tools at our disposal to communicate with people in all sorts of places around the world in a pretty amazing way. I mean, it's not that long ago that I remember watching a video on my phone and thinking it was a miracle that you could just watch a video. And now we watch live streams of things on tiny devices and get frustrated when there's even the tiniest hint of buffering, which just shows that the pace of change has been enormous, but also our expectations have changed dramatically at the same time. And I think that just to add the other tools that obviously we use a lot all the time are analysis and any kind of tool to process large amounts of information and pick out trends and understand what is being shown are also really valuable.
So with respect to distributing event assets to journalists, how has that changed?
So we have a media website, which we use to provide information to the media, but also video content. We didn't used to provide video content to media. Rather than a very big health and safety dossier, we try to make a health and safety film these days. Access to photography, I think that's one thing. I think the other thing that will have changed, that I'm sure we can all appreciate, is the real-time nature of what we do. It used to be that you could put out a statement and that would sort of be it. And now you need to be much more reactive, much more proactive, and much more real time.
With respect to processing large data sets with machines, tell us about what platforms you use for traditional and social media monitoring, and what sort of intelligence you look to them to get.
So we work with our communications agency, which is Portland Communications, and they run monitoring services for us using some of the tools that they have. We also use a platform called Social Bakers, which helps us sort of understand more broad content trends. So they're looking particularly for reputational threats and things like that. Social Bakers is more about looking for keywords and content trends. And then we also, IBM is our official technology partner, so we work with them and are using their their Watson tooling and their AI platform increasingly to try and get an understanding of predictive trends. So where is there conversation massing around a particular topic that could lead to it being worth diving into?
And what does that predictive analytics material look like? Do you get a summary? Do you have access to a dashboard? Do you get a briefing?
Yes, it's been many things. It's been a dashboard. It can be an email notice. It can be an in-person sit down. I think one of the things that we've learned during this process is that if you create dashboards, you need people to interpret them and understand them and interrogate them. And so sometimes the quickest thing is just to have a person who's able to access the data sets and explain and understand them, especially in a real-time context of a tennis event. But I think that there are always ways to present information more clearly, more succinctly, and that's something that the whole industry needs to continue to work on.
One of our listeners, Gail, asks, what has been the most valuable approach you've employed in connecting with the fan base and cultivating their interest from a sport perspective?
And that's a great question. I think some of what we've done through our use of our social media platforms as an extension of our brand, they've allowed us to basically show a slightly more human side to our brand in the way that we communicate and try and tease out some of the characteristics of Wimbledon that make it special and a bit different, and particularly relevant and current to a younger generation or people in different territories where Wimbledon maybe doesn't resonate so much. I think the other thing is that there is sorry, just getting bombarded. Sorry. Is that
cultivating interest,
sorry.
Yes. Connecting with the fan base and cultivating their interest from a sport perspective.
Yes, apologies. So developing a relationship with our fans through what we're calling My Wimbledon, which is essentially a way of having a personal relationship with us. It allows you to create an account on the Wimbledon website and to share information with us about what you're interested in, so that we can communicate with you on a relevant basis.
Let's spend a little bit of time talking about this environment that we're in now. Obviously, they just announced that they're postponing the Olympics for a year. Most of the news that I'm seeing says that we have not reached the peak yet for in terms of how many people are going to become ill from this disease. Are you guys doing a daily briefing, or are there certain measures you're watching, or how will the All England Club decide whether or not to carry on or cancel or postpone?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously, it's such a live situation. That's not really something that I can talk about. But I think we're in the position that many organisations are, that it's a fast-moving situation. We're talking about it pretty much constantly, but also particularly thinking about the people who are most affected and are really struggling and suffering out there.
Are there any specific metrics you're looking at that are sort of indicators or bellwethers, anything you're sort of monitoring really closely as a sign for whether or not it makes sense to carry on?
Yeah, sorry, I can't really say much more about it. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
also probably going to have to go in a minute, I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your taking the time to do this for us. I don't think we have any more questions. I want to thank you for joining us. And I also want to give a special thanks to Flux Branding, a world-renowned resource for defining your visual brand. Flux Branding is a group of creative visionaries and graphic designers dedicated to helping clients build brand identities at fluxbranding.com, and Digital Dragon, where children can develop the skills they need to prosper in the age of machines. Digital Dragon teaches digital literacy to tomorrow's programmers, and there's more information at digitaldragon.com. Join us next week for a discussion with Jessica Boehm. She's the Director of Marketing Intelligence at SimilarWeb, which is a very popular platform for measuring online behavior and mapping customer journeys. Again, you can download a free copy of the new 2020 Media Monitoring Buyer's Guide and get practical advice on picking the right platform at ericschwartzman.com/monitoring. If you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, you can sign in and join us every Wednesday at prtechwednesdays.com. This has been Eric Schwartzman. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next Wednesday.
Thank you.